live. Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I am Dr. Alicia. I am a therapist. I'm a couples coach. I'm also a college professor in the field of social work. And today I am so excited. I get to sit down with the Cleo Manago. Welcome him back here on Mental Health Monday. I'm so excited to talk about this conversation today, to have this conversation today, because for many months, Mr. Cleo, I would even say even years, I've been trying to have a conversation about heterosexuality, homosexuality, this particular topic with the Black community in particular, because we've had several conversations here and there on this network about sexual diversity. I walked away from those conversations with very intelligent individuals, just feeling my head was whirling a little bit, because I was floored by how little I discovered that people in general, and Black people in particular, how little I found that we knew about what normal sexuality means, what heterosexuality entails, its origin. All of that made me feel just really awful. And I wanted to have a conversation in terms of the mental health aspect. Recently, you guys, I viewed the Luther Vandross documentary. This is after months of trying to beg individuals with the LGBT community to come on this show and have this conversation with me. I'm talking about therapists. I'm talking about people who self-identify as homosexual, people who are very integrated into their Black identity, definitely integrated into their sexual identity, but would not have a conversation with me publicly about this experience, about mental health challenges. And I just got to say, I am a little disheartened, but also hopeful about having this conversation with you today. I know you have a lot of thoughts about what I'm saying, but to use an illustration, I recently saw the Luther Vandross documentary, and after being frustrated for many years of not being able to get anybody on here to talk about this, for some reason your name popped into my head, and I hadn't thought about you in like 8 years.
and I will not take that personally, but I'm listening.
Don't take it personally, but I just never really thought about it. Like, it just was an experience. We met each other years ago, and then it just whirlwind. I think we met in 2017, and it was a while ago, but you had an impression on me. And then all of a sudden your name popped up, and I said, that's the person that's going to agree to do this conversation. So I just want to say thank you for having this conversation with me. I know this is a conversation you're well versed in, and I'm hoping the other people who are listening to this, individuals who are part of the LGBTQ Q plus community, I consider myself a plus because I am an ally. And we all have people in our family, friends who are part of the LGBTQ community. And today we are having a conversation. And this is a conversation I think is very important to have. Thoughts about this, Mr. Cleo?
All right. Well, thank you for creating the space for this conversation.
Yes.
I think, to some degree, I've been on lots of talk shows. I've been on all of the major networks, and I've been on all of the Black networks, including TV One, the Black News Channel, etc. And in each instance, everybody was apprehensive, Roland Martin, etc., to have a rational conversation on this issue. And some people assume that rational means an agreeing conversation, and that's not what I mean. As a matter of fact, today, when I talk with you and your audience, I'm not trying to get people to agree with everything I say. I want people to actually have a rational perspective as opposed to an emotional, reactionary perspective on this issue. because the Black community is one of the United States Black community, because Africa has been more advanced in terms of creating community space for the dialogue than African Americans.
Yes.
And I'm real clear on what the case is, and I may break that down during our discussion. But the Black community is really undeveloped when it comes to having rational conversations. And I'll just say this before we get started, or at least as a preface, we are dealing with a lot of unresolved shame.
Yes.
We're dealing with a lot of unresolved post-castration trauma. And castration is not only the physical act of castration, which we went through for over 200 years. It's also the social castration. The murder of Trayvon Martin and all these people, that's contemporary castration, lynching, if you will, of Black men. And hardly anybody at scale or in a clearly effective way has deflected or prevented the phenomena of Black men being castrated in that context and others. It's still going on. As a matter of fact, and I don't want to get into this yet because this could be very provocative, but a lot of the pushback that the Democratic Party is experiencing these days in comparison to other options from Black men is because Black men have felt like they've been left hanging and unprotected and seen by that party for a long time, and now they've relapsed to just getting paid. And as I said in a previous discussion, Donald Trump and the Republican Party is the get paid party. So if you don't care about nothing else, if you don't have no integrity, if you don't care about justice, but you want to get paid, that's the place to go in terms of the symbology of Donald Trump and him being a so-called rich man. But all this to say is that the Black community has been involved in a Black male resurrection campaign agenda that has interfered with talking about sissies and punks and feminine men and men who are volunteering to be, I got to use the B word to make my point. I don't use it in my normal life, but I got to use it to make my point. Volunteering to be bitches, and who are, depending on how patriarchal the audience is, you're trying to be a woman and you're already a man. Why would you go backwards? And there's also among Black women who are looking for a man, they feel like homosexual men are interrupters of that interest in finding a man. And now you chasing a man too. I'm already having a hard time, and here you come. And then you have same gender loving Black men and women, but particularly men who are probably among some of those people that you were thinking about having a conversation with, who wouldn't have it, who are thinking, look, people not knowing in a very demonstrative way about my sexuality, I can retain the image of my manhood. I don't want to lose it by association with something that's considered problematic in the Black community and where those people are not considered real men. Because in a castrating society that simultaneously affirms patriarchy, the image or the performance of your manhood is better than no manhood. Mm-hmm. So homosexuality and being a sissy is not performative to manhood in a classic way.
Okay, so I'm hearing what you're saying about manhood in this historical display of castration of the Black man, literally, historically, but also in a figurative way, feeling castrated, so to speak, by not being included in the Democratic Party, for instance, feeling that the only Black man acceptable in the Democratic Party is someone who is not necessarily gay, but someone who's stereotypically flamboyantly gay, I think. Interestingly enough, this get paid party, this idea of I don't care about sexuality, all I care about is getting paid, that's a trauma response, by the way.
Yes, it is.
And this whole rational perspective, not having this rational perspective in your conversation is also a trauma response.
It absolutely is.
So is this a signal that the attitudes and perceptions about people in the LGBT plus community in our community is extension of the trauma that we've all felt, and this adherence to patriarchy, which is extremely violent, I think violent, toward those on the margins and those who are being historically oppressed. And that part of the reaction to it is to have this black and white reaction, another trauma response, is to be either or and to cling on to whiteness because you want to get your money. Getting paid is whiteness.
Right, but see, you and I agree with your analysis. However, there's so much here, and I'm glad we're talking about it. What I did say that I don't want missed is that the Democratic Party has not interfered successfully with the destruction and modern castration of black men, George Floyd, etc. Even the George Floyd Act has not been passed, and the Democratic Party didn't even pass it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be clear, separate from sexuality, which fits in here, and I hope to make it fit logically. When it comes to black men generally, regardless of sexuality, it's like, I'm going over here with Trump because this black stuff ain't working. The Democratic Party has not had my back. Blackness has not had my back. I'm going to go get paid.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily sexuality based. I'm talking about manhood and masculinity, and how, when I brought some of that up, I was talking about how some people do not want to be seen, and that's two different things, kind of, associated with homosexuality or quote unquote the gay community, because they already feel like their manhood or being seen as a man is at risk. They don't want to step into, I'll give you an example that you were a witness to, though you may have had a different analysis. When during the HIV crisis, one of the most performative, manly men black men in the Western world got HIV.
Yeah.
That was Magic Johnson.
Magic Johnson. Yeah, I remember the day.
Yes. And you would think if you weren't as analytical as I am, because I wasn't surprised by the response, you would think that, okay, a bigger than life black man has a disease that he got, which means black people can get it. So now that we know that black people can get it, let's come together, let's commune, let's mobilize and resist this disease that we can get. That wasn't the response. The response was, oh no, a black man got the faggot disease. Oh no, our symbology of the black manhood that we need so desperately as a people has that faggot disease. Oh my God. So people repress the topic. People wanted to talk about the issue, because and we should have mobilized, but we did just the opposite because we were ashamed. And
the shame.
And that's why I mentioned that there is a desperate attempt among black people, particularly black men and women who want a man, if you will, to be certainly a certain type of man, to disassociate from this issue and this topic, because it's the ultimate failure of black manhood to be a quote unquote faggot. And you know what I'm talking about, Dr.
Yes, I know, but the thing is that if you're comfortable with who and what you are and you don't live in that shame, then you're comfortable with everybody being who and what they are. Right. And I will tell you one thing, the George Floyd and all the other issues with racism, you have members of the LGBT community being on the forefront of protest against violence toward Black people. And to me, it's just like, where's our protection toward Black communities? We only supposed to protect Black straight communities, because if George Floyd was part of the LGBTQ community, we would ignore the whole thing. It's not fair. It's a double standard that we're going to support individuals just because of their sexuality. They're more deserving of airtime than the countless number of invisible members of the LGBT community on the receiving end of violence that gets mums the word. We don't even want to talk about it. We know the white people ain't going to talk about it, but then we ourselves don't want to talk about it.
Right. But see, which is appropriate, because this is what intelligent people do. You're being rational. You're coming up with a rational analysis of what is surfacely obvious or obvious on the surface. A lot of the reactions that people are having to this issue are not conscious. They're emotional.
Okay. Well, then let's raise the consciousness, because not only I feel like George Floyd got more attention than Sandra Bland. So there's gender issues there too, because I think when women are the receiving end of violence from police, women don't get the attention that a lot of the men get too.
Well, see, now you're going into
I'm going into gender stuff.
Another layer, and I was just going to say this.
Uh-huh.
I don't deal with things. I understand logic. I write proposals. I know about logic very well, and rational and reasonable behavior very, very well. However, I don't look at the world through only the rational eyes. I look at the world from a behavioral perspective when it comes to cause and effect. And as I said a moment ago, a lot of how we think is based on the observation of patterns. For example, by a long shot, and you already know this, the mass majority of people who are killed by the cops are men. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, by a long shot. So the people that get most of the press around that phenomena are men. And then you got to remember that men being murdered by the cops in high proportion is an old problem that has never been resolved. So it's hard to recognize another problem like women also being killed when a pre-existing large problem has not been addressed. And people are still grieving, mourning, frustrated, and traumatized by a pre-existing trauma that is not only has it not been resolved, it hasn't come close to being resolved, including by the Democrats. And I don't bring that up to stay on the Democratic Republican Party. I'm trying to break up some considerations regarding what happened in the last election. And unfortunately, as you and I talked in our previous conversation, Black men weren't engaged. Now, I engage Black men and women. I do it all the time. But on a macro level, Black men were called sexist and patriarchal and all these accusations instead of going, why do you feel the way you feel? Mm-hmm. There's an event that occurred, and I still want to get back to the primary source, but I'm trying to create a anthropological and mental health and behavioral perspective on this whole thing. The Million Man March. You might remember that.
Yes, I do remember the Million Man March.
At the Million Man March, to make a long story short, there was a point in time during the event that the audience, that the stage was empty, and they were preparing for the next guest and moving microphones and stuff around, and there was this long quiet, and all of a sudden, literally 2 million Black men started sobbing.
Yes.
And I mean, you could hear it and see it. Snot, the whole thing.
Even people watching. I knew actually, Boyce. I talked to him after the Million Man March back in the 90s, 95, 96. I'll never forget it. And he was like, even he was crying.
Yeah.
Watching it.
But my point to you is that was the first and last time that occurred where a day was set aside specifically to acknowledge Black men and to do something for Black men. It had never happened before. Mm-hmm. And Black men are running around this society with grief and unresolved trauma.
Yes.
That again, in our last conversation, I talked to you about how after Dylan Roof shot 12 people and murdered 9. I was the keynote speaker at a Black mental health conference in St. Paul, and I asked the audience about the Dylan Roof thing. To make a long story short, the bottom line was that the children admitted to me that their parents did not invite them to talk about it, and the people that were the most emotional about it in terms of tears were the boys.
Yes.
Because Black boys have sat through Trayvon Martin and blah, 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 blah. And nobody's inviting these boys in to say, well, how do you feel about this, baby? What's your perspective? And this was a mental health conference full of mental health professionals who brought their children. We're taught to be more assimilative and accommodationing and quote unquote successful in a white professional context than attentive to Black wounds.
Okay, so you bring up a good point because because I have a background in social work, I study these things. I know how the shame is internalized among all individuals, especially marginalized groups. But if you are Black and gay, and we know as Black men, there's no outlet for being who you are. Even if you are part of the dominant sexuality, which is heterosexuality, is the norm, you still don't have a way to express yourself. But can you imagine being a Black gay man? I know you can more than imagine that. Being a Black gay man, you really feel alone and isolated, and having that shame. That these are the people that I think about when I come in contact with individuals who are homophobic in their speech, in their language, and making innuendos, and just dismissing and shaming people part of that community. I feel protective of this particular group because of my training and my understanding and my knowledge about the fact that mental health issues are so high among this population, suicide rates, being on the receiving end of violence. I'm keeping this in mind, and I feel like such an ally to protect these particular groups of people because they feel ashamed to talk about who and what they are, and the mental health ramifications of feeling like there's something wrong with you. And I just love to have individuals like yourself who identifies as a homosexual man as a way of, and how you present yourself and how you come across has got to be refreshing. It's refreshing for me. It's got to be refreshing and seen as you're a mentor, just in your presence alone about what it means to accept yourself. And that's the goal to anybody in this population. Whether other people accept you or not, that's not the key. The key is being able to accept who and what you are, no matter what anybody else thinks. That's my next question. How do you maintain your mental health? How do you maintain your mental health knowing that embedded in who and what you are, there's so much shame?
Well, I want to make something clear, and thank you for the question. I don't identify with or as gay. Listen closely. If you study me or if you do any kind of research on me, I identify as SGL, or same gender loving.
Same gender loving. Okay.
Right. And another dynamic we're dealing with is what's called LGBTQ or gay is a white-led paradigm that's filled with just as much racism as allegedly heterosexual white people. Donald Trump and others who are clearly racist had a critical mass of white support or support from that community, including famous people like the transgender former athlete. What's their name? You heard of them? Something Jenner.
Oh, yeah, Jenner. I can't remember her name.
Anyway, they supported, and they do support Trump, and they support white supremacy and the LGBTQ movement. LGBTQ movement, for example, Donald Trump just got finished doing something very insulting to the LGBTQ community, and they want to mobilize, but they didn't mobilize behind George Floyd. They didn't mobilize behind the DEI interruptions that Trump has done. They didn't mobilize about Black history being taken out of the schools, but they want same gender loving Black people to run behind them and support them because Trump has dissed them. Well, there's more into that I could get into, but I want to keep the conversation relevant to who we're primarily focused on. I, as part of being a Black centered person, do not do anything to the extent that I can control that feeds into the myth of white supremacy. And in many cases, LGBTQ fits into the myth of white supremacy. In many cases, it's literally a love affair with the male version, when it comes to men, of white power.
Yes, that's why I have every single one of my students must watch Paris is Burning. They have to watch it. And I know it's old, but they have to watch it. We have very good conversations about, the intersectionality of income and, uh, race and homophobia and all that in the Black community. They must watch that. And then we talk about a whole bunch of other topics in there. So anyway, let me just say, I want to welcome everybody. I really appreciate everybody coming in. I see all y'all in here. I so appreciate you coming in, because this is a conversation I have been wanting to talk about for the longest time. I think it's almost time for us to get into our Luther Vandross documentary. He is someone that I really want to use as an illustration of what happens psychologically and mentally to someone who did not feel as if they could totally become who and what they want to become because of how they feel like people see them, and the effect that it had on Luther Vandross. Y'all check out this documentary. I think it's on Max. Is it on Max? I think it's on Max. And before we get into that, Cleo, I got to talk about how everybody can find me. If you want to follow me, 3 things I want to talk about. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok, Coaching with Dr. Alicia. Also, if you want to talk to me, discuss with me, I am a therapist. I'm also a couples coach. So I also work with all different types of couples. You can find me at, let me find my coachingwithdralicia.com. And thirdly, I want to let everybody know, if you want to know when I go live, please text the word love, LOVE, at 87948. And you get on this mailing list, and I'll send you information about healthy relationships. And by the way, just to even get into this topic, I was thinking about it today, Mr. Cleo, that how privileged am I where I can get online and talk about my marriage to my husband. We are a heterosexual couple, and I can talk about this freely. But there are individuals who because they have a different sexual identity, feel like they can't get online and have conversations about openly loving another person. And so I just was struck by that today, where to me, it just doesn't seem right. And this is my logical mind. It doesn't seem right that there's so many individuals that I have invited on here today to have this conversation that feels uncomfortable. I'd rather talk about Black issues. I don't want to talk about sexuality when I have the freedom, the privilege of being able to openly show the love that I have to my husband. And it's supposed to be okay because we're heterosexual, and that's okay. The Bible says it's okay. God says it's okay. When actually, if you I looked up this conversations about it this morning, and that the majority of Christians are in favor of same-sex marriages. So it's a really interesting dichotomy about what the Bible is supposed to say versus what it is in reality, it being okay. What do you have to say about that? That would be my next question to you. I'm always wondering about how religion plays a part in some of this. And, as a therapist, I know there's other therapists who do this conversion therapy, which, by the way, I kind of feel like any therapist who participates in any type of conversion therapy not only needs their license taken away, I think they need to serve criminal. They need to be put in prison, but that's another conversation. Talk about religion and sexuality before I get into Luther Vandross, but can you talk about religion in the Black community and this issue of homosexuality?
Ooh, okay. There's so much I can say. Religion, and you ask, so I might offend people, which is not my intention, but you asked the question, so I'm going to answer it. White Jesus-faced religion has been one of the most successful weapons of mass destruction white supremacy has ever created.
Yes.
It's a cesspool of hypocrisy and mythology, and all kinds of stuff. but it's what we were allowed to have. During the enslavement period, the direct chattel enslavement period, we couldn't read or write or do anything legally or learn, but we could have a Bible. And they realized that the white Jesus myth and us thinking that Jesus and God is white and praying to whiteness as the divine focus of getting to heaven and everything would keep us submissive, and it's worked. It also keeps us distracted from our knowing about how powerful we are as Black human beings in our own spiritual path. It's worked. And of course, when you pour the homosexuality into it, stuff like that, that's a good excuse for people to be reactionary to homosexuality. And I use the word excuse because, as you know, the church is full of so-called adulterers. It's full of so-called people who are full of people that could be called gluttons because it's a diabetes problem throughout the church in terms of weight. There's all kinds of people that the Bible says is wrong that does not get a lot of attention compared to homosexuality. So it's an excuse because the church have more homosexuals in ancient Greece.
The choir director. We know in the Black community, the choir
minister.
Director be up there just as flaming.
The minister.
Why ain't nobody talking about it? The ministry. Thank you.
The minister. One thing that I want to say, I don't mean to embarrass Boyce by saying this, but I have to make the point. Mm-hmm. Boyce has never been somebody, even in his earlier evolving days, who have focused on homosexuality. You know, it's never been an obsession of his. Mm-hmm. The people that are obsessed over it, including some of the people that you are talking about, they're obsessing over it because they have a personal challenge with it.
Okay.
And that personal challenge could be their own personal fear of their own desires. And there's a lot of unresolved rape and sexual abuse in our community. But in this instance, particularly from a male to a boy, and there's no place to talk about it safely. So they act out their anti-homosexual revenge through being so-called homophobic. And I say all the time that I think the word homophobic, particularly in the Black community context, is problematic. Because some of what we call homophobic is sometimes it's really trauma, rape, reaction.
Yes.
Sometimes it's really, where are the Black manophobia? Where they at?
Yeah.
We're losing Black manophobia.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's femophobia because men are stepping up. And so when it comes to Black people, that word is problematic because that's why I don't identify personally with gay and that whole paradigm personally, because it's limiting when it comes to the Black experience. The Black experience is too nuanced. Typically, when a white person's being so-called homophobic, being anti-homosexual is simply what they're reacting to. And our community is we're reacting to a whole bunch of other stuff, and sometimes that word does not fit. There's another phenomenon, and I met Luther Vandross and actually spoke with him. So this is not just hypothetical. There are some living, well-known same-gender loving people who we all know are same-gender loving, who are female and male, who are famous, who do not identify. They'll show up at the Oscars with their significant other. I'm talking about Black people now, Dr. Alicia, to make my point. They do not identify with or as LGBTQ because they see it as culturally dissonant. They see LGBTQ in their right as a white-led, white-acculturated paradigm that they don't resonate with. They need to find and discover something that's considered of who they are as Black people that also speaks to their sexuality, which is what SGL does.
SGO, same gender loving. I'm going to look that up. Is there, because I'm going to incorporate this in my course next time I have, because I teach the cultural diversity class and we talk about intersectionalities and all of that. So I'm going to add this material. You got to point me in a direction of some reading material because I'm a scholar. I got to introduce this because 85% of social workers, 85% of the students in my class, their clients are going to be non-white. And I want them to be able to be equipped with that. So SGL is really what I want. I want to get into some of that literature. And I do think, we need to be cognizant of that. I want to get into Luther Vandross. Okay, everybody in the chat, how y'all doing? Y'all let me know, did you check out the Luther Vandross documentary? First of all, I was blown away by his incredible talent. I had no idea he was responsible for all that music. He was just known as a singer. I had no idea he was producing and writing so many of those songs, a lot of them that he didn't perform. So I do support and recommend all of you all go out and look at that it's on HBO, right? It was on HBO. Yeah, it's
No,
on.
it's not on HBO. I forgot what station it's on.
Is it Hulu?
It might be Hulu, but
Ah,
it's not HBO, but it's definitely could be found in streaming context.
I'm gonna look it up. Somebody in the chat's gonna look it up. Somehow I remember it being on HBO, but maybe not. Somebody in the chat, y'all look it up and see what platform. I feel like I have every single streaming platform, so I get very confused with which one it is. But I do recommend it because it's nostalgic because I grew up in the 80s and he was like the biggest thing going. But there was always these rumors about him being homosexual, but he didn't want to talk about it. So his being, and then you said you met him and you were at the premiere of his documentary, but his living inauthentically impacted him. And it seemed like it impacted him, his mental health, his emotional well-being in some sense, because he was apprehensive and did not want the public to see everything about him. I guess he compartmentalized, and I think it played a toll on his health. But tell us, what do you think? Tell us your experience and your interaction with Luther Vandross. Oh my goodness.
Well, I may get into the story of how we met, but because of time, I want to get more into what you're saying. Of course, I'll talk about Luther because that's what we want to talk about.
Yes.
It's not necessarily true
Okay.
that Luther or what's her name? Darn it, Mom's Mabley, who
Yes.
also was same gender loving. It's not necessarily true that they had issues at all with their way of loving. Um, Luther had relationships, and he lived his life as a same gender loving man, but he was not interested in his career being interrupted by social categories and assumptions. I mean, if he wrote a song called "Since I Lost My Baby Leroy," it wouldn't have been as big of a hit as it was. His concern was being famous and implementing his craft very well and having the same kind of stature as Frank Sinatra, etc., and those kind of people. So what his struggle was not with his sexuality. He had two primary struggles that people don't talk about. It is easier to talk about that than his primary struggles. One of the things that was referenced in the same film that you saw was him being dark and fat.
Yes.
And his weight loss issue had to do with body images. It had to do with what the society considers a beauty standard physically. And he wanted to embody the perfect body as opposed to the weight issue that he had most of his life. And he also rarely dated, if ever. I never saw him with anybody who was darker than him or as dark as he was, because he had issues with that he had internalized because of how he was mistreated for being both a dark-skinned man and being overweight. So what killed him, to be specific, was the consequences of the weight yo-yo, trying to combat diabetes and not being real good at resolving his food addiction. And also another thing that killed him too, which is not talked about as much as the so-called sexuality, was he was very, very lonely. If you listen to his songs, half of them were about any love. If
Yes.
I lost my baby.
Yes.
My house is not a home, which means ain't nobody here but a chair. A chair is still a chair, etc. But there's nobody sitting there. So his primary struggles were anti-blackness, body shaming, and isolation. And what bothered him the most was that he was richer than rich, had a fabulous estate in New Jersey, had just left a fabulous estate in Beverly Hills. He had all the money and wealth that he had, but he could not find a successful relationship. And one of the reasons why he couldn't find a successful relationship because he was so self-deprecating. He had,
Yeah.
and he was so busy questioning, why do you like me? Why do you like me? Why do you like me? And he always chased so-called beautiful guys. So he was very self-conscious. And so those three issues were much bigger than his sexuality. He really, and I don't have no problem with him feeling this way, it ain't your business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, ain't your business that always mean I hate myself,
Mm-hmm.
I loathe myself. No, he means that this is my private life and this is my public life. I'm getting ready to sing for you Since I Lost My Girl, and you're going to clap and fall all out. And I'm going to do that because it's going to make me rich and famous. I'm going to do Since I Lost My Boy in terms of literal language at home because I can't build a career off of that.
I always wonder, though, to some extent, singing songs about Since I Lost My Girl, in doing that, is it a repression?
No.
He had to repress a certain part. Like I saw
It's
from
like
the
acting.
documentary that,
It's like acting.
But it just seemed like it's such an act that it's repress. And what I know and understand about addiction, and he had a food addiction. What I know about addiction comes from disconnection. This addiction is disconnection. The cure for addiction for many people has to do with connecting. So there was some sort of cutoff that he had with himself. And I didn't realize him not really fitting in, his being dark, his being heavy, and his sexuality made him not fit in many, many places. So some of that could work toward him just really feeling disconnected. And if he had one of the three was good, if he was lighter complected, maybe the other two wouldn't have had such a difficult time. Maybe if his weight was under control and he didn't have this food addiction, perhaps his color and his sexuality, he would be able to overcome that. But to have all three of that together, seems like it's so much.
I'm not going to say no names, but you're going to know who this person is, and you probably are going to figure it out. But don't ask me because
I don't know. I'm going to ask you.
I'm not into outing people. But there's this woman, still famous, still well known, who people whisper about. They assume because sometimes they could be particularly masculine, and they've done some roles where they were very masculine, and they did them very, very well. People assume that they're same gender loving, and they're correct. They are same gender loving, and they've brought their partner with them, their female partner with them to the red carpet and blah blah blah. But they don't introduce them as their partner and all that kind of stuff. And they're fine. I mean, I've talked to this person. They're not tripping. They're not mad. Matter of fact, they're glad to get into the bosom of their own space, into the sanctuary of their own life, and being with their partner in the basking in their beautiful home or homes in this case, and living their life to the largest extent in their own private space. They don't need to be on TV with their business. And they also know that if they did come out, though Ray Charles could see what's going on, and Stevie Wonder, if they did come out, they may lose some of their audience, and it's not worth it. And they're not repressed. Trust me, this person's a confident.
There is no repression.
They are not repressed, but they're not getting ready to get on stage. As a matter of fact, the same person who people, if they Google, they'll probably find this. This same person was the featured performer at a Pride event in Long Beach some years ago, and the white gay press who loves to associate famous people with itself, so it could. Its profile could be heightened. They said so-and-so comes out, so-and-so performs at the gay pride event. And she said the next day, she said, I didn't come out. She said, I was an advocate for you. I came to be supportive of you and what you were doing, but I didn't come out. And now knowing this person, they weren't self-deprecating. They were like, look, the whole white cultural paradigm because this person is quite black in their personal life. The whole white LGBTQ, lesbian is from the island of Greece. The island of Lesbos, outside of Greece. Gay is a term from gay body, from French. The term queer is from Britain. The whole thing is white. The whole paradigm, the whole ethos is white. And the representation typically is white and racist. So there's people who do not want to, who are black, who are not trying to be caught. If you could read an interview by James Baldwin in the Village Voice, where the interviewer, you can find it online, asked him about gay. And he said, homosexual, relatively effeminate, broken wrists, all the stereotypes. He said, I don't do gay. He said, that's white. I don't relate to that. This is what James Baldwin said. And I feel the same way. And so I mentioned that regarding Luther Vandross, because I remember we had a conversation. You ever heard of David Geffen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I forgot what year this was, but David Geffen had just gave $1 zillion to the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center. And during my conversation with Luther, I said, Luther, you don't have no kids. You are very, very rich.
Yeah.
And successful. Would you consider doing the same thing that David Geffen did and give a large gift to same-gender loving people? And this is what he said, and this is very important. He said, I don't want nobody else controlling my image. And once I do any kind of public investment like that, it's going to be very easy to associate me with something that I don't necessarily want to be associated with, not because I think it's bad, not because I don't like them, but because I want to have the freedom to be among people without any stigma or any judgment of me. And like he said during interviews, that's private.
Well,
and what people, including you right now, Dr. Alicia, is like, that feels like that they're self-fragmenting and that they're repressed. And I'm trying to tell you that there's some of that. I don't want to act like that's not there, but it's not the dominant issue, because there's a lot of same-gender loving people in the business who knew Luther, who are famous as well, and they get together and build a culture of their own where they affirm each other.
Okay, but it just doesn't seem fair. Like, what I talked about is that how I can put my wedding pictures up, I can showcase my love for my husband. I want to live in the world where everybody feels comfortable doing that. And I no matter what, why do I get the privilege of showcasing my love for my husband openly, posting pictures on Instagram, supposedly being, the symbol of Black love, which I have so much love for him. He's got a lot of love for me. We can show it. But someone like, Whitney Houston, who I'm thinking about too, who tragically, had her own addictions. How can it not be connected to not living your authentic self and being?
Okay, well, you went to Whitney.
I went to Whitney Houston. Yes, I did.
That's a whole nother dynamic and paradigm than Luther. Now, you can talk about repression.
Okay.
You talk about Whitney, because Whitney, unlike Luther, had a mother who was extremely judgmental.
Yes.
Was extremely religious and extremely protective of her daughter's image, because she wanted her daughter to have a flawless image and be simply extremely successful. And she accomplished that. Also, unlike Luther, Whitney, who was bisexual, not same-gender loving, she actually did indeed love men. She actually did indeed know how to, and had interest in the capacity to love a man and be intimate with a man and enjoy it and feel fine there. But she also was in love with a woman who was in love with her, who was in the environment, and who people inside of her religious family was forcing her to disconnect with. And the guilt around her sexuality definitely was was with Whitney more than with Luther in terms of that phenomenon. So yeah, Whitney would be a very complex but good example of repression. But there's another issue with Whitney that we don't talk about because we are trained to just talk about the sexuality. Is Whitney was also very, very frustrated about racism.
She was.
Whitney was a sister with
She
an A, with a
was.
capital A. She was not no white girl. She
Yeah.
was a sister. And one of her happiest moments on earth was when she went to Azania, what everybody calls South Africa, and performed after the apartheid system was deconstructed. And she was being very, very black, and she was loving it. Another profound example of her blackness was when she went to Israel, and she went with Bobby. And this is all on YouTube. You can find this. You can go to YouTube and see a video of Whitney Houston at the top of her fame being introduced to the president of Israel, whose name I don't remember right now. And he reached to shake her hand, and she took her hand back and pushed her husband in front because she didn't want to touch him because she had issues with him. And she also spent a lot of her time when she was in Israel with the black Israelites. And she gave them a lot of money. So she was no joke when it came.
You mean Netanyahu, who is extremely racist? He wouldn't even talk to Barack Obama. The way he spoke to Barack Obama when Barack Obama, like that's when I was just done. I was done with Netanyahu. But go ahead, yeah.
Well, even though Whitney is not a man, and we were talking about patriarchy at first. Whitney is a complex issue but what they have in common though, which I want to underscore, is that Luther was battling racism. Luther was battling anti-blackness.
Yes.
Whitney was battling racism and battling guilt around having the fame she had.
Yes.
Compared to a lot of other black people, and she was very ill at ease. She was very ill at ease about a lot of things because she was very sensitive and she was brilliant.
Yes.
But people, because the LGBTQ community is so powerful, will have us focus on Luther Vandross' sexuality and alleged sexual repression, Whitney Houston's sexuality and repression, but not deal with the race part, which is just as powerful in their lives.
This is so fascinating because, first of all, I think it's more acceptable for a woman to be bisexual and, to be fluid in their sexuality than it is for a man, number one.
That's true.
But number two, Whitney Houston was a crossover artist. Like she was appealing. When she first came out, she was appealing. She was marketed as the pop star, where Luther Vandross couldn't cross over if he wanted to. He was pigeonholed because let me tell you, us in the black community, we were giving him all our little money. We were buying them records. We were going to his concert. We were doing all sorts of wonderful things. Where Luther Vandross was so accepted in the black community, where Whitney Houston, I know she had to have been devastated because she couldn't get the crossover appeal, didn't make as much money or made a lot of money because of her crossover appeal, where Luther Vandross was a little confined even there. That's really interesting. I never thought about that before.
But Whitney was answered in some regards, particularly aesthetically, was the antithesis of Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross was a large, dark-skinned person. Whitney Houston was a thinner, particularly thin, lighter-skinned person who could get away with all kinds of wigs and stuff, and get her. And then she did something that white people did on purpose, and that's a whole nother story. Is they made a movie with her being with a white man called The Bodyguard.
The Bodyguard, yes.
And they did the same thing with Dionne Warwick back in the day. They did the same thing with the sister that was on the biracial sister that was on the Cosby Show, Lisa Bonet. They made a movie with her being with a white man. They do that when a black
woman. Not even a white man, but she was sleeping with the devil himself. Like that. Well,
I'm not gonna mess with that metaphor. Anyway. Leave that metaphor alone. But anyway, yeah, and matter of fact, Whitney talks about on record how haunted he was, Luther, with not being thin, and how he was depressed and all of that. Much more than his sexuality. I'm telling you, of course, sexual repression was an issue, but when I first met Luther, it was at a performance spot in Santa Monica, California called At My Place. And it was a performance club, and he was with one of his background singers, a guy that you always see singing background with him, and this white
Uh-oh.
boy named Sam something. There was this white boy on a show called Star Search. You're probably too young for this, but there used to be a show on TV called Star Search. It was before American Idol and all that, and there was this white boy whose name escapes me, but his name was Sam something, who was blowing everybody away because he sounded like a black woman, not to me, but a lot of people thought he took. Anyway, they were all SGL. You know, he was what I call white people gay. The white boy was gay. Luther was SGL, and the brother is SGL. So he was with his crew, and he had places to go to express that, to celebrate that, to be with that. Trust me, when I went to his house for a Thanksgiving celebration, and there was a lot of famous people there, but he was relatively flamboyant at that event because he was with friends, and he kept referring. I never forget. It was a lot of so-called soul food, and somebody made greens, and the greens had a lot of juice. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Don't put don't put none of that juice on my girls." And the girls he was talking about was his very expensive rug. Now, most heterosexual men are going to call their carpet girls. Don't be wasting on that green juice on my girls. So when he was at home, he was
okay. So his private life, he was able to express himself fully. He had avenues where Whitney Houston may not have had that avenue to really.
Not like Luther. No, not like Luther.
Not like Luther.
Not like Luther.
Gosh, so he must have really had it tight because it never was a topic. He had good control of his image.
Well, it was a topic. That's why you heard him say it ain't your business. Because people were asking him about it. And also black people, like a lot of people, but we could be kind of nosy. Wait a minute, you 30, going on 40, going on 50, and ain't no wife. What's up? And if you watch Luther closely, again, you have to be Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, Helen Keller, all them people, not to go,
Yes.
I mean, but we don't want him to be just like Prince. That's a whole other conversation. We don't want.
Don't you dare talk about Prince. I'm gonna come for you, Cleo. I went to performing arts high school, so we don't play when it comes to Prince.
Well, one day when it's just you and me, one day when it's just you and me, I'm going to show you a video that's on YouTube that gonna have you go. That's all I'm gonna say. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that. A lot of people who are bisexual or same-gender loving, who are black, particularly these days, are not struggling as much. One of the things I want to also talk to you about, based on some of your earlier comments, these days, and you already know this as well, there's a lot of people who are out. I'm talking about black people. There's a lot more black people who are out. There's a lot more black people who are in movies, videos, TV, protests, who are out as who they are. However, the paradigm that they tend to replicate is the white paradigm because they think there is no black option and no black choice. For example, the majority of the high profile same-gender loving black people in media, almost all of them have white partners. Don Lemon, white partner. Wanda Sykes, white partner. That guy that starred in Pose, I forgot his name, but you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He white partner. These are not coincidences. Like I've always said, there's no such thing as an accidental pattern. When it's a pattern, it's not an accident. And a lot of black people really want to be more black affirming about what they do, and LGBT doesn't fit into it.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I've got to go. We've got to end. I just want to thank you for coming on for real. And I hope that people on the receiving end of our discussion today could feel a little better about who and what they are. That money is not going to melt away your problems. That you have to be affirming. And you could be same gender loving, opposite other gender loving, and still feel comfortable with who and what you are. And when I hear comments, when I listen to comments and I hear people make even statements in the chat, I see y'all in the chat. Don't think I don't see y'all in the chat. It just infuriates me because I would hate. I just feel like being putting hatred and telling somebody that their way of living is not acceptable is, number one, none of their business. Number two, it is increasing the shame. We have a lot of things for us to deal with. And I do not think in order for someone to feel like that they are Black, that they have to shut down part of who and what they are. And I think that we all need to become allies. This is how I feel because of all of the issues. Even people who aren't, you're well developed in your identity, but I know that there's people out there questioning who and what they are, feeling shamed about it, wishing they could be someone different, thinking about ending their life because they are not part of this norm that everybody has. So as we close up today, what advice do you have for people? What advice do you have?
Well, you just did it again. You provoked me with a comment about the suicide, and I'm gonna be real
Yes.
quick because there's not a lot of time to get into that now. But a lot of the suicides, and I know some of this from personal therapeutic work and being involved in behavioral work with Black people, some of these suicides are not necessarily because of so-called homophobia. Some of these suicides are because of a lack of community,
Mm-hmm.
isolation,
Yes.
because there's some issues within the so-called LGBTQ community, a lot of lookist issues, racism issues, a lot of things that we don't got time to get into, but it's not necessarily the most emotionally safe place to be because of the hurt people syndrome that you know all about. But I want to get back to solutions. I
Yes.
think it's important that Black parents, Black
Yes.
guardians, Black guardians create space for
Yes.
their children to say who they are in their presence,
Yes.
for them to discover themselves and be able to explore appropriately with their parents, not trying to trap them into their subjective demands and expectations because they don't stop nothing. You can't stop a same gender loving child for being the same other child. You might cause them to implode or hate themselves or question their value because
Talking about homosexuality does not make someone gay or same gender loving. It
right.
does not work that way. That's a
And
topic of conversation that I am floored. There's so many Black people think that because we talk about it, it's going to turn my child gay. Like, duh, it doesn't. Read a
well,
sexuality book. It doesn't work that way.
well, again, you're being rational and logical, which is appropriate and expected. But some of us are really concerned about the behavioral outcome of black male unresolved black male intergenerational unresolved black male oppression. And some of us think, without the science, that homosexuality could be a symptom of what has happened to black men, which has been brutal, and that this is a consequence. I'm not saying I agree or disagree at this point. I'm just saying that that's some of the conclusions that people have come to in our community. And some people think by not allowing their child to be same gender homosexual that they're protecting them. Some parents think, I don't want it to be hard for you. I don't want you to be hurt. I don't want you to be stigmatized. They think they're doing them a service by helping, trying to get them to repress who they are in the society. Another solution would be to create safe space in the Black community for boys to talk about sexual abuse.
Thank you.
They
Yes.
have to be able to be
Yes.
invited to or feel comfortable, just in case it occurs, to say, "Mommy, Daddy, whoever, that man touched me." But in a manhood desperate culture,
Or a woman touched you, it's still
well, of course,
abuse.
absolutely. I mean, absolutely. As a matter
Yes.
of fact, yes, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about a particularly repressed phenomenon, which is homosexual abuse. But you're right,
Yes.
male or female, they should be able to say something. But I'm talking now about where some of the misdirected rage toward homosexuals can come from. I've met too many men who were raped from the ages of 9 or 6 to 12, who could not tell nobody because they were scared to death to admit that this was going on. And they were, like most children, they was wondering whose fault it was. in terms of and then there was no place nowhere to talk about that, and so they were wondering what their sexuality was and going through all this conflict because and there was no place in the community, the Black community context, to actually explore and engage who they really were. So I'm saying, in terms of parents that are watching, instead of traumatizing, name calling, or religiousizing or repressing your child into submission, which makes them crazy, create safe space for engagement around who they think they are. And again, create safe space to tell them about not being touched, whether it's a male or female, that it's wrong, or they don't give them permission to touch them. And whether they think they've been seduced enough into giving them permission because of the demonstrative behavior of a manipulative adult, they need to know that this is not right. And if it happens to you, baby, let me know. But what they'll hear sometimes is that I don't hear no faggot, shit, even though that's what I've said. Don't be no punk. You're abominable snowman, abomination. What's that word they use in the church? Abomination. All this kind of stuff. And it's always ironic when I hear that people do that, because like you and I kind of said earlier, the church is full of homosexuals. And the choir director. Now, this is not always true. I don't want to stereotype. Sometimes on a rare moment, like on a Thursday, it's not true. I'm just kidding. But the church is full of homosexual people who are trying to get to heaven anyway, despite their sexuality.
Oh my God. Okay. Our time is up. Thank you so much, Cleo Manago. I love connecting with you. You turned it into one of my favorite people here. Oh. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. I see y'all comments. I'm going to have something to say. This is the beginning of my conversation about my conversations. You kind of talked me off the ledge, Mr. Cleo. I was a little fiery because the research that I've done and everything that I've looked at to prepare for today, it got me all fired up. But anyway, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I got to go pick up my daughter from dance, and she's in the dance community. She wants to be an artist. So I'm talking to her, she's very open to all different types of people, even though who and what she is, she is, she's who and what she is. But how are you going to get into this business of dance and theater and not be open? Like, what's going on, So there is a community of which people need to feel safe. Thank you so much. Hopefully everybody learned something for today, and I will see y'all later next Monday. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you, Cleo.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.